Every morning, roughly 47,000 people wake up in San Francisco, make coffee in kitchens the size of a parking space, and write a check or watch a transfer clear for $3,500. Not to own something. Not to build equity. Not to leave anything behind for anyone. Just to stay. Just to remain in the same square footage they had last year and the year before that. The fog rolls in off the bay, the city glitters like it always has, and the math quietly destroys them. $3,500 a month. Picture what that number means in the physical world, in wood, in concrete, in square footage, in soil. In Indianapolis, that payment services a mortgage on a 4-bedroom house with 2,400 square feet of living space and a yard where something could grow. In Kansas City, it buys 2,600 square feet, 4 bedrooms, a lawn that belongs to you, neighbors who know your name. In Raleigh, it places a family inside one of the most respected school districts in the American Southeast, in a home with room enough that children don't share walls with their parents. The same number. The same dollars leaving the same bank account every 30 days. A completely different life on the other side of the transaction. This is not a story about leaving. It is not a story about cities being better or worse, about culture won or lost, about trading one version of yourself for a cheaper one. This is a story about arithmetic, cold, indifferent, clarifying arithmetic, and what happens when you finally let the numbers speak without interrupting them. And a gap between what that money buys in San Francisco and what it buys everywhere else that is so wide, so staggering, so impossible to unsee once you've seen it, that the only remaining question is the one you already know you've been avoiding. $3,500 a month. That is the median rent for a 1-bedroom apartment in San Francisco right now. Not a luxury building, not a doorman, not a gym, not a view of the bay. Just a decent 1-bedroom in a neighborhood where you do not have to think too hard about where you park your car after 9 at night. That is what $3,500 buys you in San Francisco. And that number is the entire foundation of what comes next. Daniel knows this number well. He is 34, a senior software engineer, fully remote since 2021, earning $145,000 a year. He pays $3,800 a month for a 1-bedroom in the Mission, a neighborhood he genuinely loves with restaurants he knows by name and a community he built over 6 years. He has $60,000 saved and has been thinking about leaving for 2 years. He and his partner, both remote, both earning well, both theoretically free to live anywhere, have stayed because leaving feels like a decision that cannot be undone, and the data they have found so far has not been specific enough to make the call. Stephanie is 41, a marketing director at a healthcare company, earning $118,000 a year. She has 2 kids, 9 and 12, and pays $4,400 a month for a 3-bedroom rental in Culver City, Los Angeles. She owns nothing. She has watched her neighborhood shift slowly in ways that feel personal. The schools more crowded, the commute worse, the sense of safety she once took for granted quietly eroding. She wants to own a home before her kids leave for college, and she runs the numbers every few months and arrives at the same wall. It does not work. Not in LA, not on her income. Here is the calculation that changes everything for both of them. Take $3,500 a month. Apply it not as rent, where it disappears completely, builds no equity, leaves no asset, but as a total mortgage payment covering principal, interest, property taxes, and insurance combined. At today's rate of 6.5% on a 30-year fixed mortgage, with a standard tax and insurance load factored in, that monthly payment supports a purchase price of approximately $485,000. That is the number this entire analysis is built on. $485,000 of purchasing power, generated by the exact same monthly output that currently rents Daniel a single bedroom in San Francisco. Now here is where the comparison becomes uncomfortable. $485,000 in San Francisco does not buy a house. It does not buy a condo with parking. It barely qualifies you for a co-op. An older building, shared walls, no yard, no garage. If you can find one at that price point, which is becoming increasingly rare. The same budget that could own a 4-bedroom home in 8 American cities gives you in San Francisco approximately the same square footage you are already renting. The city does not penalize you for leaving. It just makes staying increasingly indefensible on paper. The 8 cities in this analysis were selected for a specific reason. They are not the cheapest places in America. They are cities with real job markets, real infrastructure, real cultural life, and real school systems. Raleigh, Austin, Denver, Phoenix, Charlotte, Columbus, Indianapolis, Kansas City. Each one of them has a functioning economy, a growing population, and a housing market where $485,000 is a real number that buys real property. The methodology is consistent across every city. What does that budget buy? What school district does it land in? How far is it from the city center? And what does the rest of the monthly budget look like once the mortgage is covered? One more thing worth naming before we get into the city-by-city data. This analysis is not about lifestyle downgrade. That framing, the idea that leaving an expensive coastal city means accepting something lesser, is the story the market tells you to keep you paying rent. What the data actually shows is a trade, and in some dimensions that trade is dramatically in your favor. In at least 2 of the cities ahead, the financial delta is large enough that calling it a trade at all starts to feel like an understatement. Raleigh, Indianapolis, Kansas City. These are not consolation prizes. They are markets where $485,000 functions the way money is supposed to function. It buys you something real, something yours, something that accumulates value while you sleep. Daniel has been running this calculation in his head for 2 years without clean data to run it on. Stephanie has been running it even longer. By the time we are done here, both of them will have the specific numbers, property by property, school district by school district, dollar by dollar, to make the decision they have been avoiding. Not a vague recommendation, not a list of cities to consider, the actual math. Keep that in mind as we get into the first 2 cities on the list, because one of them is going to perform exactly the way you expect, and the other one is going to surprise you. Marcus was 38, paying $4,200 a month for a 2-bedroom in San Jose. His company went fully remote in 2022. He spent 6 months looking at spreadsheets before he made the call. He moved to Raleigh in March of 2023, and his mortgage today is $1,890 a month for a house, not an apartment, in a school district that would have cost him an additional $3,000 a month in private tuition back in the Bay Area. He is banking the difference. That is roughly $27,000 a year he was not saving before. Not because he got a raise, but because he moved. Raleigh is the first city on this list for a reason. At $485,000, the market delivers a 3-bedroom home with approximately 1,800 square feet in an established residential neighborhood inside Wake County. Wake County schools are not a marketing claim. They are consistently rated among the top public school systems in the entire Southeast, with multiple elementary and middle schools carrying ratings of 9 and 10 out of 10. For Stephanie, who has been calculating the cost of her kids' education as a separate line item for years, this is not a minor detail. It is the detail that potentially changes the entire financial picture of the move. The property itself at this price point in Raleigh is not a compromise. You are looking at a detached single-family home, not a condo, not a townhouse, with a yard, a garage, and enough square footage that 2 kids do not share a wall with their parents. The average commute from the neighborhoods where $485,000 is realistic to downtown Raleigh runs between 15 and 22 minutes. The Research Triangle job market, anchored by major employers in tech, pharma, and healthcare, has grown steadily enough that Raleigh is not purely a remote worker destination. It has its own economic engine, which matters if remote work arrangements ever change. After the mortgage payment on a $485,000 home in Raleigh, Daniel and his partner would have roughly $5,000 a month remaining from their combined income before discretionary spending. Groceries in Raleigh run approximately 22% cheaper than in San Francisco. A comparable restaurant meal costs about 30% less. There is no state income tax advantage. North Carolina does have a flat income tax, but the overall cost of living delta is substantial enough that the financial breathing room is real and immediate. This is not a market where you move and then discover the savings were smaller than advertised. Now let us talk about Austin, because Austin is the city on this list that demands the most honesty. Every relocation article published between 2020 and 2023 named Austin as the obvious answer for anyone leaving a coastal city. The tech migration was real. The no state income tax advantage is real. But Austin's median home price crossed $550,000. 4 years ago, it was $310,000. That is not appreciation. That is a city that absorbed the coastal migration and repriced accordingly. And the window where $485,000 bought you something genuinely excellent in Austin has largely closed. At $485,000 in Austin today, you are buying in the outer ring. Neighborhoods like Pflugerville, Kyle, or Manor, which sit 30 to 40 minutes from downtown in normal traffic, and 45 to 60 minutes during peak hours. The properties are newer construction, typically 3 bedrooms and around 1,600 to 1,700 square feet, in master-planned communities that offer amenities, but not the urban texture that made Austin attractive in the first place. The school districts in these outer zones are adequate. Ratings cluster between 6 and 7 out of 10. But they are not what Wake County delivers in Raleigh at the same price. This is the honest version of Austin that the relocation blogs do not publish, because most of those blogs stopped updating their data in 2022. For Daniel, who values being near the kind of urban neighborhood energy he has in the Mission, Austin at $485,000 is a lateral move at best. He buys property instead of renting, which matters, but the lifestyle delta is smaller than the headlines suggest. For Stephanie, whose priority is school quality and space for her kids, Austin underperforms Raleigh at this exact budget in both dimensions. The no-income tax advantage is worth roughly $4,000 to $6,000 annually at her income level, which is real money, but it does not fully compensate for the school rating gap or the commute load. Here is where Raleigh and Austin diverge most clearly as investments, which matters for Kevin even if he is watching from Chicago rather than San Francisco. A $485,000 property in Raleigh, in a solid Wake County neighborhood, has appreciated at an average of 6 to 8% annually over the last 5 years, and the rental market, if Kevin wanted to lease it instead of living there, generates a gross yield of approximately 5.5 to 6% at current rents. Austin's appreciation has been faster, but has also corrected more sharply, and the rental yield at current prices is closer to 4 to 4.5%. Raleigh wins on yield. Austin wins on brand recognition. Brand recognition does not pay the mortgage. Keep that in mind as we move west, because the next 2 cities are going to challenge everything you think you know about the so-called affordable West. Denver and Phoenix are the cities that show up when San Francisco people search where to move if they want to stay in the West. They feel like logical geographic compromises, close enough to the mountains, far enough from the coast to matter financially, familiar enough culturally that the move does not feel like a complete reinvention. The instinct makes sense on the surface. But the data on both markets tells a story that is more complicated than the relocation headlines suggest, and understanding exactly where $485,000 lands in each city is the difference between a smart move and an expensive miscalculation. Denver's median home price crossed $500,000 in 2023 and has held near that level since. That means $485,000 in Denver is a below-median purchase, which immediately tells you something about where you are going to land geographically. In the neighborhoods within 15 minutes of downtown, Capitol Hill, Highlands, Washington Park, $485,000 buys a 2-bedroom condo or a small townhouse, typically between 900 and 1,100 square feet. You are not buying a detached single-family home in those neighborhoods at this budget. You are buying attached, urban and smaller than what the same money buys anywhere else on this list. Push the Denver search to the outer neighborhoods, Aurora, Lakewood, Arvada, Thornton, and $485,000 starts to deliver something more recognizable. A 3-bedroom detached home, somewhere between 1,400 and 1,600 square feet, in a neighborhood that is functional without being exciting. School ratings in these zones vary considerably, clustering between 5 and 7 out of 10, with some pockets performing better, depending on the specific district boundary. The commute to downtown Denver from these areas runs 30 to 45 minutes by car, though the light rail system covers some of these corridors reasonably well. For Daniel, who left San Francisco partly because he wanted more space and a stronger financial foundation, the Denver version of $485,000 in the outer ring does not feel dramatically different from what he left behind. He would own instead of rent, which matters, but the lifestyle upgrade is modest compared to what the same budget delivers further east. Here is the risk that most Denver relocation content glosses over entirely. Denver sits in a semi-arid climate and depends heavily on snowpack and the Colorado River system for its water supply, a system under increasing stress from drought, upstream agricultural demand, and long-term climate variability. This is not a hypothetical future problem. It is a present constraint that municipalities across the Front Range are actively managing through conservation mandates and infrastructure investment measured in billions of dollars. For anyone buying a home expecting to hold it 15 or 20 years, water availability is a variable that belongs in the calculation alongside school ratings and commute times. Denver remains a strong market with a diversified economy and genuine cultural appeal. But the complete picture includes this, and most articles about moving to Denver do not mention it at all. Phoenix operates on a different financial logic than Denver, and that logic has a specific implication for Daniel and Stephanie that is worth understanding clearly. The median household income in Phoenix is approximately $65,000 a year. At a median home price of around $420,000, the price-to-income ratio for a local buyer sits at roughly 6.5, which means the average Phoenix resident structurally cannot afford to buy in their own city. For someone arriving from San Francisco with a $145,000 remote income, that dynamic is not a warning sign. It is a structural advantage. Daniel is not competing with a local buyer pool. He is entering a market where his income places him in the top tier of purchasing power, which changes the negotiating position entirely and creates a margin of financial comfort that simply does not exist in the coastal markets he is leaving. At $485,000 in Phoenix, the purchasing power in terms of raw square footage is among the strongest of any Western market on this list. You are looking at 3 to 4 bedrooms, between 1,800 and 2,200 square feet in established neighborhoods across Chandler, Gilbert, or North Scottsdale, all of which carry strong school ratings, with multiple districts consistently hitting 8 and 9 out of 10. The commute profile from these areas to central Phoenix runs 20 to 35 minutes, which is manageable by any reasonable standard. For Stephanie, whose non-negotiable is school quality for a 9-year-old and a 12-year-old, the Chandler Unified and Gilbert Unified districts are genuinely competitive with what Wake County delivers in Raleigh. And the property itself at this price point is larger, newer, and more feature-complete than anything available in Denver at the same budget. The honest risk in Phoenix is the same risk Denver carries, amplified by geography. Phoenix sits in the Sonoran Desert, and summer temperatures regularly exceed 115 degrees Fahrenheit for weeks at a time. The city's water supply depends substantially on the Colorado River through the Central Arizona Project, and Arizona has faced mandatory water allocation reductions as lake mead levels have declined over the past decade. These are not reasons to categorically rule out Phoenix. It is a metropolitan area of 5 million people with a serious economy, significant corporate relocation activity, and active infrastructure investment in long-term water management. But they are reasons to think carefully about long-term utility costs with air conditioning running 8 months a year, and what climate trajectory realistically means for property values over a 20-year holding period. Here is where Denver and Phoenix land relative to the thesis of this analysis. Both cities deliver more than San Francisco at $485,000. That bar is easy to clear. Phoenix delivers meaningfully more than Denver at this budget. More square footage, stronger school options, and a lower cost of living overall. But there is a zip code in one of the Midwest cities coming up next that completely reframes what $485,000 can do. Not just as a home purchase, but as a financial instrument generating real annual yield. Keep that in mind as we move east, because the gap between what this budget delivers in Phoenix and what it delivers in Columbus and Indianapolis is not incremental. It is a different category of outcome entirely. Nobody moves to Charlotte because they saw it on a list. That is, in fact, precisely why Charlotte keeps outperforming expectations for the people who do end up there. It does not have Austin's marketing machine or Denver's outdoor identity or Phoenix's sun-drenched Instagram presence. What it has is a financial sector that employs hundreds of thousands of people, a cost of living that has not yet caught up to its own growth trajectory, and a housing market where $485,000 functions like real money in a way that would be unrecognizable to anyone who has spent the last 5 years buying or renting in a coastal city. At $485,000 in Charlotte, you are looking at a 4-bedroom detached home with somewhere between 2,000 and 2,200 square feet, depending on the specific neighborhood and year of construction. The areas where this budget performs best, Ballantyne, Steel Creek, South Charlotte broadly, sit between 15 and 25 minutes from uptown Charlotte, which is a commute profile that most people arriving from the Bay Area or Los Angeles would consider almost unreasonably short. The Charlotte-Mecklenburg School District has high-performing zones concentrated in South and Southeast Charlotte, with several elementary and middle schools carrying ratings of 8 and 9 out of 10. For Stephanie, who has been watching her kids navigate overcrowded Los Angeles schools for years, the contrast is not subtle. Charlotte carries an economic profile that matters for long-term property value, and this is the data point that most relocation content ignores completely because it requires understanding something beyond the current home price. Charlotte is the second largest financial center in the United States by assets, behind only New York City. Bank of America is headquartered there. Wells Fargo maintains one of its largest operational hubs there. That concentration of high-income employment means the buyer pool competing above $485,000 is deep and persistent, which creates a floor under property values in the neighborhoods where this budget lands that does not exist in markets built primarily on remote worker migration. Charlotte is not dependent on one company or one trend. It has institutional economic weight. North Carolina's income tax rate is a flat 4.5%. Lower than California's top marginal rates by a significant margin for both Daniel and Stephanie, and there is no Charlotte City income tax layered on top of it. The overall cost of living in Charlotte runs approximately 35% below San Francisco across groceries, dining, utilities, and transportation. After the mortgage payment on a $485,000 home, a dual-income household like Daniel and his partner would have more breathing room in Charlotte than in any of the Western markets covered so far. That is not an opinion. It is what happens when you subtract the same fixed cost from a lower overall price environment and let the math speak. Now move 400 miles north and west and land in Columbus, Ohio. And understand that the number $485,000 behaves differently here than anywhere else on the western half of this list. Columbus is a Big Ten university city with a genuinely diversified economy, insurance, healthcare, technology, logistics, retail headquarters, and a population that has grown consistently for 2 decades. Ohio State University anchors an intellectual and cultural infrastructure that gives the city something most Midwest markets lack: a constant influx of educated young residents who choose to stay rather than leave after graduation. That dynamic sustains restaurants, arts, and neighborhood energy at a level that surprises most people arriving from coastal cities with low expectations. At $485,000 in Columbus, the market delivers a 4-bedroom home with approximately 2,200 square feet in a neighborhood carrying a school rating of 8 out of 10. The specific areas where this budget performs most consistently, Dublin, Hilliard, Upper Arlington, Westerville, are established communities with mature tree lines, neighborhood parks, and the kind of physical permanence that newer master-planned suburbs in Phoenix or Austin simply do not have yet. The commute from these areas to downtown Columbus runs between 15 and 25 minutes. Ohio has no flat miracle on income tax. The state rate is graduated and tops out near 4%, but the overall tax burden in Columbus is still substantially below what Daniel or Stephanie currently pay in California. Here is the open loop that was planted in the previous chapter, now closed. The zip code that reframes what $485,000 can do as a financial instrument is in Columbus's Dublin School District. A 4-bedroom home purchased at this price point in that zone currently rents for between $2,400 and $2,600 per month. Against a mortgage payment of $3,500 on the owner-occupied primary residence math, that rental yield on a comparable investment property in the same market generates a gross cap rate of approximately 6 to 6.5% at current prices. Kevin, the financial analyst in Chicago, who's been reading about real estate investing without pulling the trigger, should be writing that number down right now. Columbus is not a market where you live cheaply and sacrifice everything else. It is a market where the math of ownership works in multiple directions simultaneously, and that combination, livability plus yield plus school quality plus economic stability, is rarer than the market currently prices it. Charlotte and Columbus do not trend on social media the way Austin does. They do not appear in the first paragraph of relocation think pieces the way Denver does. But the people who have made these moves and run the numbers 12 months later are not complaining about the lack of press coverage. They are too busy noticing how different their bank statements look. There is a moment in this analysis where the comparison stops being interesting and starts being almost absurd. That moment arrives when you apply $485,000 to the Indianapolis and Kansas City housing markets and look at what comes back. Not a condo, not a townhouse, not a 3-bedroom in a neighborhood you feel lukewarm about. A 4-bedroom detached single-family home with a yard in an established community with square footage that in San Francisco would require a budget so far beyond $485,000 that it would not even appear in the same conversation. In Indianapolis, $485,000 buys approximately 2,400 square feet across 4 bedrooms in a neighborhood that was built to last. Mature landscaping, established infrastructure, neighbors who have lived on the block for a decade. The areas where this budget performs most reliably, Carmel, Fishers, Zionsville, and parts of the Broad Ripple Corridor, consistently rank among the highest-rated residential communities in the entire Midwest. Carmel, Indiana has been ranked among the best places to live in America by multiple national publications, and its school system performs at a level that would cost a San Francisco or Los Angeles family significant private school tuition to replicate. The commute from these areas to downtown Indianapolis runs between 15 and 25 minutes, which in the context of Midwestern road infrastructure feels almost negligible. The financial arithmetic in Indianapolis at this budget is where things shift from impressive to genuinely structural. Indiana has a flat state income tax rate of 3.15%, the lowest flat rate of any income-taxing state in this analysis. Marion County property taxes on a $485,000 home run below $5,000 annually in most residential zones, which is embedded in the $3,500 monthly payment calculation already. After mortgage, taxes, and insurance, a remote worker earning $145,000 in Indianapolis takes home a meaningfully larger net figure every month than the same person earns in California, not because the salary changed, but because the tax environment and cost structure changed around it. And Daniel should run that specific calculation with his own numbers. The result is not marginal. For Kevin in Chicago, who has been watching this analysis for the investment angle more than the lifestyle angle, Indianapolis is the market that closes the loop opened back in Chapter 1. A 4-bedroom investment property in a Carmel or Fishers zip code purchased at $485,000 currently rents for between $2,600 and $2,900 per month. The gross yield on that rent against the purchase price lands at approximately 6.5 to 7%, which is a cap rate that Chicago's North Side market has not seen in 15 years. If Kevin moves to Indianapolis, lives in his property for 2 years to capture the owner-occupied mortgage rate advantage, then converts it to a rental when he buys his next property. He is simultaneously solving his housing cost problem and building the investment portfolio he has been researching without executing for 3 years. That is not a lifestyle compromise. That is a strategy. Kansas City represents the outer edge of what $485,000 can do in the American housing market before you start trading livability for price. At this budget, the Kansas City market delivers a 4-bedroom home with approximately 2,600 square feet, the largest footprint on this entire list, including a yard that is not decorative but functional in established neighborhoods on both the Missouri and Kansas sides of the metro. The specific areas where this budget lands most favorably, Leawood and Overland Park in Johnson County, Kansas, carry some of the strongest school district ratings in the region, with multiple schools rated 9 and 10 out of 10. Johnson County, Kansas has a median household income among the highest of any county in the Midwest, which means the neighbor pool. Local retail quality and community infrastructure reflect a level of investment that the home price alone does not fully communicate. The Kansas City variable that most people do not factor until after they have moved is the food and dining culture, which consistently surprises people arriving from coasts with assumptions about Midwest homogeneity. Kansas City has a legitimate culinary identity, rooted in barbecue but extending well beyond it, and a downtown arts district, a robust live music scene, and a walkable urban core in the River Market and Crossroads neighborhoods that functions at a quality level significantly above what the national reputation would suggest. This matters for Daniel, who has been reluctant to leave San Francisco, partly because the lifestyle richness feels irreplaceable. Kansas City does not replicate San Francisco. Nothing does. But it delivers genuine urban quality of life at a fraction of the cost. And for someone whose primary complaint is that the math of staying no longer works, that distinction deserves serious weight. Here is the number that ties Indianapolis and Kansas City together as the strongest pure financial plays on this list. Between the two cities, a household moving from San Francisco with a combined income of $200,000 and a $485,000 mortgage payment would conservatively generate between $45,000 and $60,000 annually in additional net financial capacity through lower taxes, lower cost of living, and lower baseline expenses, compared to the same household remaining in San Francisco. That is not a projection. That is arithmetic applied to current, verifiable data. Over 10 years, compounded with even modest investment returns, that delta is the difference between financial optionality and the treadmill that Daniel and Stephanie have both been running on without getting anywhere. The cities ahead in this analysis cover what the rest of the budget looks like once the mortgage is the smallest problem you have. The mortgage payment is the headline, but the mortgage payment is not the whole story. And for Daniel and Stephanie, the whole story is what actually determines whether this move transforms their financial lives or simply relocates the same problem to a different zip code. $3,500 a month covers the housing. The question that matters just as much is what happens to everything else: the groceries, the childcare, the car insurance, the restaurant meals, the utilities, the property taxes beyond what is already embedded in the payment, and the slow accumulation of daily spending that either builds a life or quietly drains one. That number, the cost of life left over, varies dramatically across these 8 cities, and understanding it changes the ranking in ways the housing data alone does not reveal. Start with the baseline that Daniel and his partner are working from in San Francisco. After $3,800 in rent, California state income tax at their combined income level, and a cost of living that ranks consistently among the top 3 most expensive metro areas in the United States, a household earning a combined $200,000 is saving somewhere between $2,000 and $4,000 a month if they are disciplined. That is not wealth accumulation. That is financial survival with a high income, the specific condition that defines the audience for this analysis. The goal of moving is not just to reduce the mortgage payment. It is to widen the gap between income and total monthly expenditure until that gap becomes the foundation of something real. In Raleigh and Charlotte, The cost of living delta versus San Francisco runs approximately 30 to 35% across the major non-housing categories. Groceries in both cities cost roughly 20 to 22% less than in San Francisco. A full-service restaurant meal for 2 runs between $35 and $55, where the same meal in San Francisco costs between $70 and $110. Utilities in North Carolina, electricity, gas, water, average between $160 and $210 per month for a 3 to 4 bedroom home, compared to $300 to $400 in the Bay Area. For Stephanie, childcare is the line item that often swings the entire calculation. Full-time childcare for 1 child in Charlotte averages around $1,100 to $1,300 per month, compared to $2,200 to $2,800 in the San Francisco metro. She has 2 kids. That gap alone, annualized, funds a meaningful portion of a college savings account. Austin and Denver occupy a middle position in the cost of living comparison that their reputations do not fully reflect. Austin is frequently marketed as a low-tax, affordable alternative to coastal cities, and the no state income tax advantage is real, worth roughly $5,000 to $8,000 annually for a household at Daniel's income level. But Austin's grocery costs, dining prices, and utility bills have risen substantially alongside its housing market. The cost of living in Austin today is closer to Seattle or Portland than it is to the Midwest cities on this list, and anyone moving from San Francisco expecting a dramatic reset in daily spending will find the gap smaller than anticipated. Denver is similar. It has shed most of its affordability advantage in non-housing categories as the city's population and income levels have risen. Both cities deliver a genuine improvement over San Francisco, but the improvement is incremental rather than transformational when you look at the full monthly budget picture. Phoenix offers a specific financial dynamic that requires nuance. The cost of living is lower than Austin or Denver in most grocery and dining categories, and Arizona's income tax reforms have pushed the marginal rate meaningfully below California levels. But the utility costs in Phoenix are a line item that demands honest accounting. Air conditioning a 3 to 4 bedroom home in the Phoenix metro during summer months, which run from May through October at temperatures requiring near constant mechanical cooling, adds between $250 and $400 per month to the utility bill for 6 months of the year. On an annualized basis, that is an additional $2,000 to $3,000 in utility spending that does not exist at the same scale in any of the other cities on this list. Phoenix still delivers net savings relative to San Francisco, but the number is not as clean as it initially appears. Indianapolis and Kansas City are where the full budget picture becomes the most compelling argument for the move. Indiana's flat income tax rate of 3.15% versus California's rate of 9.3% for Daniel's income bracket represents a difference of roughly $8,000 to $10,000 annually in take-home pay, before touching housing, groceries, or anything else. In Kansas City, Missouri's income tax is higher than Indiana's but still substantially below California, and the cost of living across all non-housing categories runs approximately 38 to 42% below San Francisco. A household earning $200,000, combined and living in Indianapolis or Kansas City, with a $485,000 mortgage as their primary fixed expense, has a realistic path to saving between $6,000 and $9,000 per month after all costs. That is not a projection built on optimistic assumptions. It is what the math produces when income stays constant and the cost environment around it changes substantially. For Stephanie, the specific line item that crystallizes this chapter is the combined child care and school quality equation. In Indianapolis and Kansas City, top-rated public school districts eliminate the private school calculation entirely for her 9 and 12-year-old. The education quality is already embedded in the property value rather than billed separately. Her monthly childcare and after-school program costs drop by more than half compared to what comparable arrangements cost in Culver City. Over the 6 years before her younger child finishes high school, the cumulative difference in that single line item funds a down payment on a second property. The mortgage buys the house. The rest of the budget in these 2 cities builds the future. By this point, The question is not whether $3,500 a month is a lot of money. You have seen what it buys when it works as a mortgage instead of a rent check. You have walked through 4-bedroom homes in Raleigh, Columbus, Indianapolis, and Kansas City without leaving your couch. You have watched the square footage rise, the school ratings climb, the commute times shrink, and the savings gap widen with every step away from San Francisco. The only honest question left is what you are actually going to do with that information. For Daniel, the verdict starts with a hard line drawn through the map. Denver and Austin fall into the category of almost better than San Francisco, but not enough better to justify the disruption of leaving. In both cities, $485,000 buys him more space, but not transformational space, and the cost of living advantage, once he adds up groceries, dining, utilities, and taxes, feels incremental. Phoenix sits on the edge of that line. The house is bigger, the schools in the right districts are strong, and his income gives him a structural edge over local buyers. But the long-term heat and water story is not background noise if he is planning to hold the property for 2 decades. For someone whose leverage is complete remote freedom, Daniel should not trade one fragile equilibrium for another. The cities that actually make sense for Daniel are Raleigh, Charlotte, Columbus, Indianapolis, and Kansas City. In that order, with one specific caveat. Raleigh and Charlotte give him the cleanest combination of quality of life continuity and financial upgrade, tech and finance jobs on the ground if his remote status changes, strong school systems if he and his partner decide to have kids, and social environments that will not feel like exile after San Francisco. Columbus is the surprise contender, delivering a 4-bedroom home in a top-rated school district with a credible urban core and a Big Ten energy that most people underestimate. Well, Indianapolis and Kansas City are the purest financial plays, the places where his $145,000 income stops being median and starts being genuinely powerful. But they demand a clearer emotional yes to the Midwest than he has given so far. For Stephanie, the decision tree looks different because her constraints are different. She is not optimizing for cap rates first. She is optimizing for her 9 and 12-year-old, for school quality, for neighborhood safety, for commute sanity if she takes a hybrid role again, and for a path to actual ownership before her kids leave for college. On those criteria, Austin falls out of contention quickly. The outer ring commute and mid-tier school ratings at $485,000 are not enough to justify tearing her kids away from the community they already know. Denver, with its water questions and below-median purchasing power at her budget, becomes a maybe at best. Raleigh, Charlotte, Columbus, and Kansas City emerge as her shortlist. Raleigh places her family inside Wake County schools with a 3-bedroom detached house and a mortgage payment that gives her breathing room for the first time in a decade. Charlotte adds the stability of a major financial hub and South Side school districts that let her cancel the mental tab she's been keeping on private school tuitions. Columbus, in the 8 out of 10 school zones around Dublin and Upper Arlington, gives her a 4-bedroom house and a community where college feels less like a distant aspiration and more like the default trajectory. Kansas City, especially on the Johnson County side, delivers the biggest house, the biggest yard, and some of the strongest public schools on the list, at the cost of a bolder cultural shift away from the coasts. Kevin has been in the background of this entire analysis, running the numbers from Chicago with a different lens. He is not primarily asking where to live. He is asking where capital deployed at $485,000 generates the most reliable yield without forcing him into speculative bets on overheated markets. On that question, the ranking changes. Columbus and Indianapolis sit at the top for him, 6 to 7% gross yields in stable, growing metros with diversified job bases and no single employer risk. Kansas City is close behind, especially in Johnson County zip codes, where tenant quality and school ratings support both rent stability and long-term appreciation. Phoenix and Charlotte form the next layer for Kevin, markets where appreciation potential is meaningful and the risk profile is acceptable, as long as he respects the climate story in Phoenix and the financial sector concentration in Charlotte. Austin and Denver, paradoxically, drop to the bottom of his investment list. The cap rates at current prices simply do not compensate for the volatility of markets that have already absorbed a decade of front-loaded appreciation. They are great cities to enjoy. They are not the cities where his first or second investment property should live, if his goal is actual cash flow, rather than a long shot on future price jumps. So here is the plain language verdict, with no hedging. If you are Daniel, a high-earning remote worker in San Francisco, Raleigh and Charlotte should be your default first tier. With Columbus as the data-backed dark horse, you force yourself to visit before you sign a lease anywhere else. If you are Stephanie, a parent in Los Angeles staring down the double wall of rent and school quality, your most defensible options are Raleigh, Charlotte, Columbus, and the Kansas side of Kansas City, in that order, depending on how far you are willing to move from the coast. If you are Kevin, the aspiring investor who is tired of reading threads and ready to own something, Indianapolis, Columbus, and Kansas City are where $485,000 stops being an abstraction and starts being an asset. The last piece is the part nobody can do for you. The math will not pack your boxes. It will not tell your friends you are leaving or explain to your parents why your address now includes the word Ohio or Indiana. But the math can do one thing very clearly. It can strip away the story you have been telling yourself that staying is the responsible choice and leaving is the risky one. In the world you actually live in, the world where $3,500 a month either buys you a one-bedroom in San Francisco or a four-bedroom house and a savings rate that changes the shape of your entire life. The risk is not moving. The risk is waking up 10 years from now, writing the same rent check in the same city, with the same numbers staring back at you from your bank account, and realizing the only thing that changed was the time you no longer have.